Jen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you
you
so much for driving over from Southport this morning to be here.
You're most welcome. It's lovely to talk to you, always.
Oh, thank you, Jen. Thank you. So I'm really fascinated in this whole subject of hope because I don't think it gets talked about enough. There's so much dialogue about health and wellness and well-being, and so much focus on what we're eating and the exercise and Fitbits and all of that. And I think there's something that gets forgotten in all of that, which I've seen in my coaching, I know you've seen throughout your whole career, which is hope. So can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about how you came to be interested in this subject?
Yes, I certainly can. Yeah, so probably around the middle of my career, I was working in a very large hospital in the northwest of England, and it struck me that both medicine really and psychology, perhaps to a slightly lesser extent, is very problem focused. So we all concentrate on how much pain somebody's in, how depressed they are, how much struggle they're having, which is right, really. We need to sort of pay attention to those, don't we? But I was also struck by the fact that probably the greater proportion of people that came through the services, particularly through the sort of general hospital side, were actually doing okay. They were doing all right. And I worked with the plastic surgeons, so we saw some really horrific things. And actually, even then, people were finding a way.
These were people who'd been in explosions and
accidents or who had incredibly complex, difficult to heal wounds, or whatever it is. Obviously, a proportion of those people were struggling, and that was why you need people like psychologists in those services in the hospital to be able to try and help those people to cope and adjust. But a lot of people did not need to see a psychologist. They, with a bit of TLC and good care, they were kind of on their way. And I started looking at the literature in that, and if you look at the literature, it does say that about 70% of people going through general hospitals are not anxious and depressed. They don't need a psychologist. So that's obviously the big majority of people are finding a way, whatever that might be, to kind of get through and make the best of things. So I thought, I started looking at the positive psychology literature, looking at how is it that how do people have resilience? How do they keep hope in sometimes situations that could seem quite hopeless to the rest of us? How do people get through things? Because then maybe if we look at it that way, we can learn something about how to help the people that are struggling to be more hopeful, to be more resilient, and trying to sort of see the norm as getting through, and what can we learn from that? How can we help other people to have more hope, to have more quality of life? So it's a kind of philosophical shift that I found personally sort of appealing. It sort of appealed to the way that I try and see the world. So I learned a lot about positive psychology. I was trained you'll know about CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, those sorts of therapies I was trained in. When we trained, that was how I trained. But at that time, I discovered a new form of therapy, which is solution-focused brief therapy, which again is based on people's best hopes, really, and what's already right about them, and trying to uncover that. And that sat really well with this shift in philosophy that I was kind of going through, to looking at people's resilience and how to encourage that. Solution-focused brief therapy is a therapy that tries to really uncover people's strengths and resources and goals.
Because everyone has them.
Because everybody has them. Everybody has motivation for something. Everybody's hoping for something, even if it's just to get through the day without having a panic attack or whatever it is. Everybody gets up in the morning with some sort of hopes for that day.
But they don't often see themselves as having strengths.
Absolutely.
And I know in coaching, because we're also trained in positive psychology,
yes,
and one of the first things I always do with a client is get them to take a character strength survey.
Yes.
And very often they'll say, oh, I don't have any strengths. I'll say, you do, because everybody does, and we're going to find out your particular order of strengths.
And they're natural, or you might not.
Yeah.
You're sort of born with them. It's almost like, so it's like in me to organise people and to sort of, kind of have a plan for things. I actually can't help myself. And I think once people, as you say, have sort of done the strengths test and they sort of see, they start to see, oh yeah, it's not something I choose to do. It's something I almost can't do. And we've all got those particular characteristics. But once we've recognised what they are, we can bring those to whatever the challenge is. Yeah, yes. So it's absolutely about trying to uncover what's already right with people, how they've already got this far, what their hopes are, who's around them, what other resources might be around. So it's a coaching type approach, really, solution focused therapy.
Yeah, and so powerful when people discover that hope, and that's what I'm always looking for when people walk out this door, because this is actually the room where I coach. And when I see it's quite intangible, but it's a sort of buzz, it's hope. And when I see that and they sort of sit a bit straighter and they walk out a bit perkier, I know they're going to get themselves better. And that for me is more important than knowing at that point what they're eating or how much they're exercising or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because I know that they've got something.
People don't need usually more information or more advice.
True.
They've had a lot of information and advice. If they're coming to you or me, they've had a lot of that, and that hasn't worked. So it's about doing something different, and that the kind of conversations that we'll have are to. It's really hard to put it into words, isn't it? Yeah, to uncover what's already there in a way. They do it themselves. We're not in their houses, are we, saying, oh, you shouldn't eat that, or why don't you go walk around the block? It has to be from within. They have to make those changes. They've got to want what's at the end of the rainbow. They've got to believe. So if you look at, there's a lot of literature on hope, obviously, in the positive psychology. And the model that I like the best was a guy who's called Schneider, he's unfortunately not around anymore. But he said that hope has two aspects, and he's got a very brief assessment tool, the one that I used in my research, and he called it the will and the ways. So people have to sort of be able to see the steps to get to over the rainbow, where they want to get to. So that's the ways. They have to sort of see that there would be a pathway. Some people can't see the next step. They have to be able to see the pathway, and that's the ways. And then the will is the belief that they've got the capability to take that next step. So there's two factors in it, if you like. So we could see the steps, but either not be motivated or not believe we've got the capability to take them, or we could be all kind of fired up with enthusiasm, like a really optimistic person, but perhaps not actually have see what the next step is. So we then wouldn't take a step. So hope has these two factors.
Wow, it's really interesting. And I guess because you've worked with a lot of people who are suffering from chronic pain and all sorts of really challenging chronic conditions, and yet you found, chat us through what the research showed about those that had hope. Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that the research shows that people can have. A lot of people could have the same, if you like, amount of physical difficulty, actually showing up, say someone, let's take the example of arthritis. You could take 10 people who've got really the same objective amount of disease that a doctor would say, oh, you've got, 7 out of 10 or whatever, however they would rate it. But those 10 people would have very different responses to that based on their own experience, history, personality, strengths, whatever it might be. And really it's the response that we have to it that predicts our well-being, our sense of quality of life, how happy we feel day to day, it does not correlate with the amount of objective disease. And I think that often does blow people's minds slightly. You know, you could have people with really very severe disease of any kind or disability of any kind, but their well-being, quality of life and sense of happiness is good, or they would say it was good. So and then they tend to do better. They take less medication. So people who have a high sense of well-being and quality of life and hopefulness take less medication for the same amount of illness. They rate the quality of life better. They see the doctors less, and actually there's lots of evidence that people with a high sense of hope and well-being even live longer.
Wow.
Have you heard of the nun study?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So that's a really classic example where young nuns were asked to write, weren't they, as they were sort of taken into the order, and then they were followed up, and many years later, lots of them were still alive at a ripe old age. But when they looked at what best predicted how long they lived, it was the ratings of sort of how much they were sort of looking forward to and had a passion for the vocation that they were going into. Yeah. More than any other factor.
Yeah, I love that study, and I think they did that because it was such a closeted
They
group.
would all have the same diet,
same diets and everything,
same lifestyle, same hours of sleep and everything like that. So absolutely fascinating. So I think we underestimate really the importance of thinking about well-being, happiness, hopefulness as its own outcome, and trying to sort of work towards that, noticing what gives us that a better sense of well-being, better sense of hopefulness, because that's the main predictor of all these other outcomes like wellness and pain, experience of pain, and going to the doctor, etc., etc. So the whole science of well-being and happiness is so fascinating.
So with pain, you're saying that people experience pain differently, although they have the same amount, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Somebody with more hope would experience the pain as less. Is that right? Because there's an emotional element to pain.
There's definitely an emotional element to pain, and it's people bring meaning to pain, don't they?
Yeah.
Whether they feel it's something harmful, mm-hmm. That's going to get worse, that indicates something else, or that is maybe a punishment for something. There's all kinds of ways in which pain gets complicated by emotional things, but then obviously it's going to be more difficult to cope with those overlays of emotion.
Yeah. So for people who may be suffering from, say for example, fibromyalgia or something that's a really unpleasant,
ongoing, challenging, unpredictable, really difficult,
and would seem quite hopeless because their day-to-day level of quality of life is so negatively affected. And it might seem to them that, well, now I'm being blamed for not having a positive approach. So is that now my fault? So how do we help people to see that? Firstly, how can they have more hope? How can they be helped to foster more of that? And how do we help them to see that there's not more things that they have to kind of blame themselves for? Definitely,
I think chronic pain, kind of over and above anything else, is really challenging to your well-being. So that's the first thing that I always used to say to people is that, wow, it's really difficult. If you're in pain every day in a chronic way, that is massively challenging to well-being. So in a way, all the more important to work out what's going to help you maintain that, because you've got this huge challenge to well-being. So no, definitely it's that people are always doing their best. They are, and no surprise that people get ground down by waking up every morning and having difficulties. But what we'd be looking at is what what makes an even slightly better day was the kind of conversation that I'd often have with people who are in a lot of pain. You're quite right. You don't want to sort of imply that they've had a lot of people implying they should sort of buck up and get a grip.
Put a smile on.
Because they don't. No, but from looking at them, you can't. People always say that, don't they? You know, look at me. I don't look ill.
Yeah.
But you know, really, the experience is very difficult. So, what would an even slightly better? So, change is everywhere. Variation is everywhere. So even with someone with a chronic condition, they will have times when it's worse, but that implies there must be times when it's slightly better. Mm-hmm. So being a kind of super detective and encouraging them to notice when did you have an even slightly better day? And it's putting your attention in a different place. When you've got chronic pain, you tend to focus on, oh God, it's worse. You know, and then this sort of catastrophic thinking about it getting worse or being bad all the time and all the things it stops you doing. But if there's a variation of getting worse, right, that inevitably implies that there's times when it's slightly better. So shining your light, shining your attention on, oh, it's slightly better. Or sometimes we'd ask partners, you know, to come in as well, and we'd say, if you notice anything slightly better or a slightly better day, or Joan, let's say, being even 1% more herself, mention it, notice it, and then think, well, what? Oh, that's interesting. You know, you're kind of being a detective about what made that slightly better day.
Because you wouldn't normally notice that 1% difference, and you certainly perhaps wouldn't flag it.
Exactly.
Necessarily.
Human nature is to notice threat and danger and negative things, because that was how we survived, wasn't it? We survived by, and pain is a kind of threat experience. So we become kind of focused on it, and it getting worse. So the way that, in a way, psychology can help is to sort of say, well, that's understandable, it's human nature, but how can we refocus your attention to when it yeah, like you say, when it's even 1% better. We're all normally noticing, worrying about things getting worse, aren't we? Even when you've got a bit of a slight ache yourself, you're like,
yes.
You forget to notice all the other bits of your body that
it's so true.
are feeling okay today. Yeah.
Like if I have a pain in my right hand because I have repetitive strain injury, I never notice that my left hand is always pain-free. Because why would you? It's
exactly.
just meant to be that way. And you never think, oh, I'm so grateful that my left hand works properly.
I can still do
pain-free.
These other things.
Yeah, we just never do. We're not taught to do that. And it's only when the right hand starts hurting that it's suddenly like, I have pain in my hands, and that's when you start noticing.
Yes. And so doing more of the things that you notice that are happening preceding good days. And then so you're not advising somebody, wouldn't it be good to walk around the block or whatever your advice, clever professional advice might be. But you're waiting for them to discover, I was a bit better on Thursday afternoon. I wonder why that was. Maybe it's because whatever it was that they did or ate or, and lots of chronic pain can't be cured, can it? But it's about how can you live your best life with that with that pain and all the things that. True. So pain's a bit like it's a kind of one-track communication between whatever's painful and then the brain, and if you're able to, so people will sometimes notice that if they can get completely absorbed in something,
in a state of flow,
the pain is obviously still there if they then think about it. But even for a moment, they can notice it slightly better. So quite a common thing was we'd say, did you notice any times when, or what do you really like doing? And they'd say, I love it when the grandchildren come round. They're so beautiful and they're watching them, and then. What did you notice? They notice that while the grandchildren are there, the pain isn't right in the front of their mind. It's still there, but it takes a bit of a back seat, and then they're getting all the lovely, benefits mentally of watching their grandchildren or whatever it might be. So I know we're going to talk about knitting later, but that's another example where people might concentrate on something.
Yes.
And even momentarily then go, oh, I wasn't thinking about the pain.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find things that give you the feel-good hormones, you know, whatever it is that you enjoy. And brings meaning to your life.
And that's not just for people with chronic pain.
That's for all of us.
It's for all of us.
Yes.
Because we might not have chronic pain, but we might just be going over anxious thoughts that are getting stuck, going round and round our head or whatever it is, or just worrying about this, that, or the other. Giving
ourselves a hard time about something, being self-critical. Yes. Yeah, whatever it is, you know, everybody has their own struggles.
We do. Everybody does.
Yeah.
And just as you say, being in that state of flow just gives you a little break from that. So we can build our resilience.
Yeah. So the ideal kinds of activities are things that are maybe a little bit repetitive, like knitting or swimming or whatever it is, or playing the piano, but that have some skill involved so that you're focusing on it.
Yes, so you want a little bit of a challenge. I'm not such a good knitter, so I have to really go knit one purl.
Yes,
So I'm totally immersed in that when I'm knitting because I'm not so proficient.
Yeah, and I think that's why things like yoga work, because you're concentrating on not falling over as well as getting the kind of mental benefits of the breathing and so on. I think if people struggle with things like meditation or mindfulness, I'm one of those people actually. I can't just be meditating or mindful. My brain does just, I probably could practice more, but my brain just sort of wanders off. So I try and do things that are mindful and repetitive, but that have some sort of, like yoga, you know, you're not just meditating, you're doing as movement meditation.
Yes, and it reminds me of when I came to your house for lunch recently and David came in from outside, your husband David, and you said he'd been on his... Was he cutting? Oh yes. Was he on his little
He's got a mower and he goes round his wood.
Yes. And you said that was his meditation.
He loves that. It's his break from, you know, all that he does is he says, I'm just off to plant some trees or go on the mower. Round again.
And he came in so chilled and relaxed. I mean, he always is, but...
Yeah. So noticing what works is something that we can all do, isn't it? When did I have a better day? Yes. When did I feel more relaxed? When did I feel more cheerful? Do more of that.
Absolutely. And speaking of David, so you have held these very successful groups, and you've shown David, who was just a traditional GP, the benefits of hope, and also getting people together in a group to help them get better.
Yes.
You know, as a community.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
So it started off really of me trying to teach him. I could see that, you know, this way of thinking is really helpful for doctors, because often they've got people that are not easily solved. You can't solve chronic pain or, you know, obesity, all these kinds of issues sort of overnight, can you? It's really, how do you help the patient to take some control, and often the relationship with a doctor is you want them to give you something or to fix you, and it's easy for the doctors to fall into that, isn't it? So I trained him and helped him understand this sort of solution focused idea as well. What are you hoping for? What's the person hoping for? And he always asks them that now. And then, you know, this what sort of strengths they have, what's already working, what other resources are around, and then what's this sort of small next step that they want to you know, it's not you telling them what to do next, it's them saying, well, this seems like the next thing that I should
because that's going to be different for every single person.
Completely different.
Always super careful never to be prescriptive about
never advice.
Never, because, you know, for one person, you know, they might love playing the piano, and I can't play piano, so it would be just pointless.
You'd never come up with that.
It would be pointless. But, you know, for example, one person, they may, you know, if you suggest swimming, well, I hate swimming. I love swimming, but they might hate swimming.
For whatever reason.
Exactly.
For whatever reason.
So they're never going to do it. So if it comes from them, and it's amazing the solutions that come up.
You would not.
You would never. I mean, I was once coaching a girl. She was actually in Dubai, I think she was, and she got addicted to it was caramel popcorn. She was very unhappy with the way she looked, and she just felt not good in her own skin, and yet she just had got into this habit of buying it and eating it every evening. Now, I could have come up with all different alternatives to the popcorn, like homemade popcorn with this instead of sugar and blah blah blah. But I kind of put it over to her, like, what could be something else that you might enjoy? And you know what she came up with, Jen? Radishes. I would never in a million years have come up with that. But that was her solution, and it worked brilliantly for her. And she got off the popcorn and lost the weight and got back to feeling great.
Yeah.
But it had to come from her.
Absolutely. And if you've ever had heavy advice from anyone, you'll know that in your own head you're thinking, that's never going to happen.
Yeah, and you kind of nod because maybe
you're polite.
Maybe you're a bit in awe of a professional. But you think there's just no way. And sometimes I meet people who they've been told to get an exercise bike and they buy the exercise bike. They don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. They don't enjoy it. The bike just sits there. Then they feel guilty and it's kind of accusing them every time they see the bike. But actually that person really liked Nordic walking. And that's what I got them to do. Exactly. And they really enjoyed it.
Bingo. So. No, definitely. So I sort of explained to David that advice was, it's got you can give information, fair dues, but not advice. So, and he really got that, and he really understood that, and he started practicing in that way. So that was the sort of early days, if you like. And then I stumbled across low carb because I've all my life struggled with weight up and down and diet this, being successful and then putting it all back on. The same old story, really. And looking back now, I understand that I am actually I'm a sugar addict, and it helps me to sort of think of it in that way. But one January, I happened to pick up a book by Dr. Briffa. I don't know if you've ever come across it, but it was called Escape the Diet Trap. And if it's still around, it's perfect. And it's only about that big. And it was on sale in Morrison's. And it was basically low carb advice. But of course, I'd never come across it before. Read some bits out to David about, it says here that a slice of bread has 4 teaspoons of sugar. And he's saying, well, that's ridiculous. Because none of us we didn't understand about the glycemic index at the time. Anyway, off I go and go try this. I thought, right, I want to escape the diet trap. I'm going to follow this guy's advice. It felt amazing. Well, not the first week, because it's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? But after that, felt amazing. And started getting more interested in it and start telling David about it. And then we had a conversation sort of to the side. He was fed up of general practice at that time, very worn out, tired, and sort of, just low about the fact that people were getting sicker and sicker, and to him that didn't seem like somehow he was doing good medicine. It was very sort of disheartening. So we were talking about retiring. We went on a run, as we do. We like running together, and I did my solution focus thing, and I said, well, if you were going to have a good retirement, what would that look like? Because he didn't want to sort of go out on a sad note. I thought, what would that look like? And we both agreed it would be quite nice to do something together, a project together. What could we do? We thought we'll combine these two things. He wants to do something for the people that seemed to be, just getting more and more overweight and sicker with type 2 diabetes. And we discovered this sort of low carb thing, which I really believed in now, and I kind of understood the science of it, if you like. And also bring my experience with running groups and this sort of solution-focused coaching. And we thought, those will go really well together. We didn't have any money or anything. We just started it on an evening group with a small group of people at the beginning. I think it was about 18 people in the first cohort. And off we went. And the rest is history, really. Yeah,
and it's been remarkably successful.
Really. And, the difference in David is unbelievable. I mean, he didn't believe he didn't have a smartphone. I think he's got 45,000 followers on Twitter now, and he disapproved of social media. It's funny. It's funny to see.
So you talked there about groups. So
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more? Because I've also seen the power of groups in my day-to-day work, and I'm constantly astonished by how quickly you can get momentum and change when you put people with peers in a very non-judgmental sort of environment where they can open up without fear of being laughed at or judged in any way.
Absolutely. I'm a massive fan of groups, and I think it's one way in which we will need to go in the future in the NHS is to transform things by running groups. And it's just there's what's not to like. It's efficient, so you don't need even necessary professionals, so long as there's some sort of safeguards around it. I think if people have a shared goal and they're in a group, it's like a gestalt where they all encourage each other, share information, celebrate each other's success. There's some sort of sense of accountability to going to the group and kind of, there's this, we were talking before what we were mirror neurons, and that what you tend to do is to absorb the sort of the goals of the group, if you like, and the ways of behaving in a group. And it's easy to follow that once you're in. It just sort of happens. Oh, that's what everybody's doing. They're not eating sugar. I'm not eating sugar either, because I'm going on Thursday and I'm going to tell them, how well I'm doing. So
it buoys everyone up together,
buoys up,
and it's just effortless. I was doing even a one-off group. I'm so surprised by what I see. Like a couple of weeks ago, I was doing. It was at a yoga studio, and it was like a day retreat, and I was just brought in to do the coaching. But I stayed with it was a group of women all day. And one lady, when we sat round in a circle, and I talked about the challenges of changing habits, and I was very frank about the challenges that I've had and where I've mucked up. And she said, do you know, I've booked 3 times to come on this yoga day. And it wasn't cheap. And each time she just hadn't been able to come, because she thought people are going to laugh at me when they see me in my leggings, and they're all going to be slim and bendy and can do everything, and they're going to laugh at me. And I said, it's amazing that you have turned up today. It's amazing. And she said, but do you know what? I turned the car around 3 times. But even today, she turned the car around 3 times, but she had turned up. And when she said that, the girl next to her just burst into tears. And I think that's when people just tune into that real, honest authenticity of someone just saying it like it is. And everybody, and there were bendy Wendy's, and there were very kind of glamorous yoga bunnies, but everybody opened up about their insecurities and the challenges, and there was nobody in that circle who didn't have them. Yes, maybe one person was slim and was bendy and the other person wasn't, but when you got down to the pure humanity at their core, everybody was struggling.
Slim and bendy on the outside, not necessarily loving themselves on the inside.
Correct. It's so true. And yet when you just put people together, and there wasn't necessarily any bit of information that I shared with them that was in any way revolutionary or anything, but just the fact that I had just facilitated this group that could then open up, that was what was bringing about this transformation. It was no information from me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was 7 years ago that we started it. It's still ongoing now. People spilling out of the door every time we do it. We need a bigger room, really. And it's just been, well, as you say, and fantastic for the practitioners, as you say. So you came out of that uplifted. You don't feel like you've done days work and you're exhausted. Like we run those groups.
That's not work.
No, exactly. You run the group, you come out and you're like, oh my God, we've got a lady at the minute. She's still losing weight now. She was in a wheelchair about, I think it's only just over a year ago. She was in a wheelchair. She's lost 8.5 stone, and she's still losing weight.
And she's out of her wheelchair.
And you don't hear stories like that and not just come away.
It sounds like just a miracle that you would read about.
Exactly. And then she inspires other people. We've got other people who are still coming after 7 years, because even though they know how to do it, they love to come and be part of that community, and they bring their photos or their big pants and show, it inspires people who, just live around the corner from them, because this is only for the David's practice. So it's a local community. People of a similar age, they identify with those other people. They think if they can do it, so can I.
It's so contagious, that feeling of hope.
It's not somebody on the telly, is it, who's, who's nothing to do with you, who's, like you say, a 20-year-old gym bunny who's saying, do this. And no, they identify with those people. They think if they can do it, so can I.
Yes.
That gives you the will, the feeling that you can do it, and the ways, because well, I'll just do what they did, which is basically cut out sugar and starch. That's basically what it boils down to. I can do it too. And then they do it and they get some results, and that's motivating. They come back and they say, look, my graphs. We always print out the graphs for them. They love that. Graphs off EMIS, so you can print them out. Whatever it is you're measuring, HbA1c, weight, or whatever it is, and they come back with these graphs.
It's just amazing. And wonderful. To feel that everybody in the room is rooting for you, which is the case. It's just incredible. When I did a group at my local NHS hospital where my kids were born, I also set up, this is for staff, I also set up a closed Facebook group. And I would just post daily sort of tips and, like, come on guys, if you looked at this and who's done this today. But actually, I kind of was able to take a step back because they took it over. So somebody would post a picture of, this is what I had for breakfast today. So last week they were having, cornflakes. And then they'd had this beautiful, very nutritious breakfast with lots of protein and good fats. And everyone else would go, oh, wow, that looks delicious. That looks amazing. And the next day, they posted that, because you get this kind of friendly competition going where everybody and what they told me afterwards was they felt so good when other people put a caption saying, oh, your breakfast looks delicious, and then they were then even more enthused and even more motivated to post the next day with what they're eating.
You're making like a new norm, aren't you? So the society we live in is not how should we say it, it's very obesogenic, isn't it? So everywhere you go, sugar, the garage, the supermarket, the office, sugar, cake for Easter, Valentine's, Christmas, birthdays. Even the
workplace, because it's a Tuesday, or because it's
a Tuesday.
Birthday.
Somebody made like 24 cupcakes for everybody. No, it's lovely, isn't it? But the environment's crazy, really. We're all eating fast food and that's kind of the norm.
Yes.
So you have to find your tribe that's doing something different, and then that's the new norm. And I think that's why people keep coming to the group, because they're, it's that, well, I'm not, out in the world, we might seem a bit unusual. I don't eat any sugar now or carbohydrate at all, haven't done for a long time, bread, anything like that. To a lot of people that still seems unusual. But to people like you, or in the group,
I still do.
That's okay. You can moderate. That's fine. I can't moderate. But now my latest thing is I'm training in sugar addiction with Bitten Johnson, who's in Sweden. So it's like an international training, and we're doing a 4-day intensive in Bristol. If anyone's interested, they can get in touch. We're doing a 4-day intensive for people struggling with sugar addiction.
And that's everywhere, isn't it? I see it absolutely everywhere.
Or for professionals who want to know more about it. So we've got some places left with people. So that's my next big interest, is helping people with, who are really struggling with sugar addiction to live a sugar abstinent life.
And I don't think it's really seen. I don't think it's given the importance that it merits, because when somebody has a problem with alcohol, firstly, it can be very evident, or not always, but the thing is with sugar, it's hiding in plain sight. So you can be in an office and the person next to you can literally be eating biscuits the entire day, and it's just perfectly normal, and then go home and be binging on packets of sweets, etc.
Yeah, it's a hidden.
It's absolutely everywhere, and I see the damage, not just on a physiological level, but the damage it does to people's self-esteem. And I've had people sitting in the seat where you're sitting there just sobbing, because they feel so powerless, they feel stupid, they feel greedy. And they've gone to their doctor, and the doctor didn't know what to do with them.
It's not a recognised. Yeah, I mean, hopefully that'll come, but it's there's lots of people campaigning for that. It's not actually a recognised problem, even though there's lots of evidence actually that sugar does affect the brain in similar ways to drugs, and there's lots of ways in which. So when you have sugar, for example, you do get a dopamine hit, you do get a serotonin hit, but actually, the price you pay is along the lines of alcohol. What goes up must come down, or any other sorts of drugs, that you're depleting the brain of dopamine and serotonin over time, which are the feel-good hormones, the things that. So over time, there's a new book out actually I need to read called Brain Drain, which is all about this. But over time, you are actually making things more difficult.
Yeah, and I've seen people try to deal with it in different ways. Like people they put a sweet in their mouth and then they spit it out, thinking that that's a way to get around it. And people who've told me they've had a gambling addiction, and this is worse. Or they've been addicted to opioids, all sorts of stuff. A guy who was drinking unbelievable amounts, and we managed to get him off the booze before the sugar. I mean, it's the grip it has on people is incredible.
And, Bitten would say, and lots of other people working in the field would say, it's actually the gateway drug because usually it starts quite young. So I know in my own case it would probably be 5 or 6 years old. I can already remember thinking that I couldn't get enough of this sweet stuff. So it starts very young. We have access to it very young. We're all giving our kids sweets as treats. So those who are vulnerable, not everybody's going to get addicted, are they? It's like alcohol. I can take or leave. Other people really, really struggle. So it's not definitely going to happen, but the more kids we expose to high amounts of sugar, some of them are going to struggle. So by the time we get into adult life, we've had 15 years of already using this substance. And when people give up alcohol or cigarettes, they do tend to then struggle with sugar. That's why people put on weight after they've given up cigarettes, because we transfer to something else. Yes. Or people who have bariatric surgery, a high proportion of those are probably sugar food addicts. When they have the operation, it works for a while, but you often find people liquidizing stuff, turning to alcohol.
They'll find a way to keep treating the addiction.
Yeah. So yes, low carb works and is good, but some people will struggle to stay on it and might need some additional help. And it's not true to say that it helps everybody, but I think a certain proportion of people really helps by recognising that actually it's not their fault. Like you were saying, people feel weak, and it's not their fault. The brain's been hijacked.
Yes.
And, so they haven't got control over that. But if they think of for some people, it certainly helps me to think of myself as an addict, and I think, right, well, I'm sort of in remission because I'm on the wagon, so to speak, with sugar. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't be vulnerable or couldn't fall off it at some time if something happens. Yeah.
So, and especially if that's been your emotional crutch, if you've learned as a child that sweets make you feel better when your mum is making you feel inadequate or not accepted for you, or whatever it is.
Or whatever it is.
We all go through.
Some sort of trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be, it can help people kind of feel less stressed, less bored, in
the short term, is that
in the short term?
Yeah.
But the long term, as I say, is you're going to need. It's like any. You're going to need more and more to get the same effect.
Yes.
Because of that effect in the brain of sort of adjusting to it. You're going to have cravings when you don't have it. You're going to experience withdrawal symptoms when you try and stop, and that's why people go back to it, because it's horrible, that feeling, isn't it? So, but if you can understand that, I think you can help people through. That's what we're hoping with the 4-day intensive, is to explain all this to everybody, and also 4 days of all the catering will be delicious and obviously sugar-free, so they'll have that experience of being able to cope without it. And then it's about, as we're going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, building up those activities and things that give you dopamine and serotonin in a better way, in a more sustainable way, because you will, like with any addiction, your brain sort of needs to heal. So how can you get that boost in other ways?
Which brings us neatly onto your knitting groups. So tell us a little bit about that. This is for people with mental health issues.
I volunteer at a recovery college in Southport, and because I love knitting and crochet, I volunteered to teach people knitting and crochet who have mental health challenges. So
it's something I'm actually going to learn. You'll be very pleased to hear, Jen. I've booked myself on a workshop next month
crochet,
to learn how to crochet a granny square, which is something that I've been wanting to learn for a while. But tell us how what do people get out of coming and sitting with other people. And
yeah, I mean, again, it's going back to this, the power of the group, really, isn't it? That, often people who are very isolated or struggle socially can come and sit. And I think there's something less intensive about, it's not a group where we're kind of talking about anything. You're not
necessarily looking at someone's
You're
face.
not looking at somebody.
Down. You can look down and still chat.
Exactly. There's something to sort of focus on. So, in fact, some people just come for the chat, to be fair. They bring their knitting. Not much knitting gets done, which is absolutely fine. So that it's less intense and we can be focusing on that. And we've had people who've been sort of coming for years and don't ever say very much, but they keep coming. And I think there's that sense of connection. I think for those people who want to learn and improve their skills, then there's that sense of having achieved something. So there was one lovely lady who has never done any crochet before, and then after a few weeks we helped her to learn, and I think she could make granny squares in the end, and she made a blanket for her daughter, and just that pride of having made something for somebody else. Or we do a lot of knitting for charities, and I think that's people love to feel they're giving back. Yes. Or we have the Linus project. The lady comes every so often and collects all the things that we've made.
So this is knitting squares, isn't it, that go to make a blanket. So someone like me who's not a terribly proficient knitter, but I can knit a square.
Yes.
And I've also contributed to blankets in the past that have gone to like homeless people.
Exactly.
So you've got people with mental health problems coming to your group, knitting squares.
They can just knit squares and often if they're learning to knit, we just start them off with squares anyway, because you can just do knit.
Yeah. And then they go, so the Linus project takes them to...
We sew them together to make blankets, and the Linus project, which people can...
Oh, it's Linus, isn't it? It's Linus like
Peanuts.
Peanuts, who had a blanket.
He had his blanket.
Yeah.
And the Linus project started in the States, and it started off as a quilting project, but they do accept things that are knitted or crocheted, and they give them to the police, the fire, the hospitals, social services, and when they come across a traumatised child, they get a blanket and to keep. So once a blanket's been given to a child, they get to keep it.
So lovely. When you think about all the love that's gone into every stitch of that blanket that's going to be left with that child.
Yeah.
So lovely. Well, Jen, it's been so interesting to chat to you. I'm really... I would have loved to chat longer about the whole sugar and everything like that.
We can do that another time. Have me back to talk about sugar addiction.
Yeah, I think the sugar addiction is just is so relevant to so many people, and I think we just need to talk about it more so that people know that they're not alone. Because I think that's the thing with the group, isn't it? Is people, they recognise that they're not alone when they hear the person next to them saying, "I go home and I just inhale 3 packets of biscuits."
Yeah.
And then the person sitting next to them thinks, it's not just me.
Yeah. It's normal for some of us.
Weird. Yeah. And they then can start to heal as well as the person talking. So you just get this amazing momentum and magic that happens.
Agreed.
Great. Any final thoughts? I'd love to know maybe what we've talked a lot about hope. What's your hope for people, for how our healthcare system works? How would you like to see things moving forward?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think if we can all have those kinds of conversations, really, where we ask people what they're hoping for more, what they're hoping for from a meeting, from an appointment, from joining a group. I think it helps us to clarify our thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, and not just a number on the scale. So not just, I want to lose a stone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What difference would that make?
Yeah. What would you be able to do if you lost the weight? I
often say to people, I'm a fly on your wall, or I'm a documentary maker. My secret camera is in your house. In 6 months' time, what would I see that was different? So it's about real concrete changes in somebody's life. What would better look like?
Yes,
is a great question to ask people.
And it's amazing when I get people to think of that, and you see that they go into this kind of wistful state, and you can see, their eyes move, and they sort of get a little subtle smile, and they're tuning into that feeling of, I'd be wearing that, and I'd be doing this, and I'd be playing that, and I'd be in this environment. and you can literally see the hope
Exactly.
on
And
their face.
sometimes literally asking that question or having that conversation is enough. Sometimes people come back and that's it.
Yeah.
They're off.
Yes, because then they kind of think, well, if now they've tuned into that, because that's the opposite of being told, unless you change your ways, you're going to have a leg amputated or, go blind, all the rest of it, which puts you into a state of fear. And you close down, because who wants to hear that? I mean, really, who wants to hear that? But once you get them to tune into this amazingly powerful image of their future self, the hope, there's this future self that actually is happy and healthier, and then they can start to think, well, what's one tiny thing that you can do? And it might be a teeny tiny thing, but it's just taking that
like
first
that
step.
lady, that was a tiny thing. Seemingly, not to her. So
the lady
that turned up at the yoga.
Oh,
so
yes.
the small step was that she came to the yoga, but that was actually a big step for her. We've had people who say, that their small step. I had one lady who always sticks in my mind who said, I said, well, what would be the first tiny sign that things have turned around, or the first tiny sign of a miracle happening? And she said, I'd open my bedroom curtains, because she'd just been staying in bed and with her curtains closed for weeks, and so to us, opening your bedroom curtains is a tiny thing. To her, it was the first step in a different direction.
And I think it's so important to celebrate every tiny step. I mean, I was coaching a guy recently, and we'd got to talking about some childhood stuff, which he got emotional, and it was good that it came out and that he was processing it. But he normally, whenever he had an unpleasant feeling, or he was remembering unpleasant times from his early life, he would automatically go to the petrol station and buy a load of chocolate biscuits and binge. And he texted me about an hour later and said, Susie, I've just arrived home and I came straight here and I didn't go to the petrol station. And I was so happy for him. And I said, that's amazing. So it's so important, isn't it? But for him, that was a huge thing.
And that's what we were saying about exceptions or times when the problem isn't as bad. Celebrate that.
Absolutely.
A slightly better day. You got home without doing that. Now tomorrow you might do it again, but he knows he's done it once.
And people don't get a pat on the back, so we need to give much more of that. You did it, that's amazing. Now what are you going to do next? And then it's like, and you get this sort of childish enthusiasm coming out, which we just is battered out of us, I think, as adults.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more.
Well, it's been such a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on and being such a brilliant guest. And where can people find out about, these activities that you're involved with?
Okay, so the Sugar Addiction Intensive, if you want to go on the website, Bitten Johnson's website is Bittens, Bittens, bittensaddiction.com.
Okay.
They can find out the details there. That's in May. I'm involved with the Public Health Collaboration, so people can look at their website.
And you're on Twitter?
PHC.org.
Yes.
No, phcuk.org. I'm on Twitter at Jen_Unwin.
Okay. And David's also very active on
Twitter. He's at Low Carb GP.
Brilliant.
But he's got enough followers.
Oh, bless him. Well, thank you so much again. And I look forward to chatting to you more one day about sugar.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jen.